Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Blake Shelton called If I'm Honest. So when I reviewed Blake Shelton's last album, Bringing Back the Sunshine in 2014, I made the comment that he had to be the luckiest guy working in modern country music. In retrospect, I probably was too kind to the guy. So let's put his career in context, shall we? He's a mild-mannered B-lister who played a little bit more contemporary than Tim McGraw, but not quite as rowdy or political as Toby Keith. Blake Shelton got his start back in the 2000s with some decent tunes, but nothing you really care about after you heard it, with a very rare exception. Part of this was because Blake Shelton maybe wrote one or two songs per album. He wasn't really a distinctive authorial voice as an artist, but partially because, as a whole, he was never really all that consistent or interesting, very middle brow, very safe. And like everybody else, I assumed that when Chris Young came along, Blake Shelton would find himself getting replaced. But then bro country happened, and having snagged a judge position on The Voice that he'd ride to victory after victory, Blake Shelton was able to capitalize on the biggest spotlight he'd ever had to ride the trend to previously unheard of heights for him. And sure, some of that might have been luck. Tim McGraw was fighting for artistic freedom against Curb Records, Toby Keith was singing into alcoholic mediocrity, and maybe with the exception of Brad Paisley and Dierks Bentley, the rest of his competition were either too young or too harsh to play in a similar genial lane. Unlike someone like Jason Aldean, Blake Shelton seemed capable of smiling when he was singing, even if he hadn't written a single song on a fair few albums at that point. But then things changed. His marriage to fellow country superstar Miranda Lambert failed in spectacular fashion and was devoured by the tabloids, and he got involved with fellow judge on The Voice and pop star in her own right, Gwen Stefani. And while I was eagerly awaiting for the album of unbridled hellfire that Miranda Lambert was bound to release, there's not a woman in mainstream country who can get as emotively raw and pissed off as Miranda Lambert since maybe Reba McEntire. I was genuinely curious to hear what Blake Shelton was planning with this, and the album seemed almost designed to provoke more controversy, featuring the most writing credits that Blake Shelton has ever had on an album, and the title, If I'm Honest. And while there's definitely a part of me that was kind of skeptical, at the end of the day, Blake Shelton's a consummate businessman who's never really been particularly raw or personal in his writing. I had hoped there was something here that might cut a little bit deeper, get a little bit more personal. So did we get it? Honestly, not really. Okay, well, there are more touches of more personal subject matter, and maybe even the rough trace of an arc along this album, showing Blake Shelton getting over Miranda Lambert and finding new love with Gwen Stefani. But at the end of the day, this is still a Blake Shelton album, and a flabby one at that. The sort of record that could have easily been trimmed down to a tighter list and might have worked a fair bit better. That said, it doesn't contain the egregiously awful songs that ruined Bringing Back the Sunshine and did prove to be more organic than I was expecting. So yeah, If I'm Honest is a step in the right direction, but it's a very small step, and really, I was hoping for more. So let's start off with Blake Shelton himself. And yeah, what is there to say at this point? He's always had an expressive and charismatic delivery for the past 10 albums, with solid pipes and enough stage presence to sing opposite Gwen Stefani convincingly, even if their material comes from completely different worlds. But the larger issue is that if you were expecting Blake Shelton to get raw and dig into any potent emotional pain coming after this breakup with Miranda Lambert, well, that doesn't really happen. And while you could argue it saves songs like She's Got Away with Words from real obnoxiousness, it also undercuts any sort of emotional drama. We get snippets of yearning and loneliness on Bet You Still Think About Me, which is later repeated with far less effectiveness on the very next song every time I hear that song. And then this album does hit a point of commiserating darkness on Came Here to Forget that I liked, but that momentary glimpse into introspection is shut away when Blake Shelton finds new love and everything is good again. It's one of the reasons why the distrust on Go Ahead and Break My Heart feels kind of weird. Not only is it sung with Gwen Stefani, his current paramour, that ends without any sort of emotional breakthrough or reconciliation, which feels kind of oddly stilted to come right in the middle of the album. And look, I don't doubt Blake Shelton's sincerity, he's plainly good at it, but I don't feel we're getting anything beyond surface level emotions. No nuance or deeper examination that would give us details beyond the very most basic, the stuff that's right in front of us. Now, granted, Blake Shelton's always trafficked in very broad emotion that can run right up to the limit of corniness. One of my biggest issues with Bringing Back the Sunshine is that he's really trying to play things slick and it really didn't work, and I think that he understood that. Granted, the alternative is playing to a very stiff, very clunky brand of country music that hits a low point right out of the gate with straight out of cold beer, which aside from lifting a rap cadence from the obvious NWA reference, is yet another southern pandering anthem that did not need to be here. Or take Doing It to Country Songs, a duet with the Oak Ridge Boys that has one bad joke, the one in the title, that they hammer on with cornball clunkiness. It's really not a good song, even though I like the Oak Ridge Boys harmonies. But the larger issue in the writing comes in all the filler. This is a record where 4 or 5 5 songs could have easily been cut, and not just because they add nothing to the arc of the album. Every time I hear that song, it might fit, but it's redundant right after the better Bet You Still Think About Me. The very bare bones It Ain't Easy About New Love is only really distinctive because of the horn section that shows Blake Shelton trying to hop on the trend with middling results. A Guy with a Girl is basically a track where he's showing off to Gwen Stefani for guys to try and fail to make passes at her. Friends is only here because it showed up on the Angry Birds soundtrack, and it actually has a fiddle for a little bit more of a country flavor. I didn't mind it. And You Can't Make This Up tries for a cliched first meeting at a bar and tries to make it less cliche by referencing the cliches. Yeah, sorry Blake, self-awareness is not saving you here. But the most egregious example of padding out this album and recycling is Green, a song originally recorded on Blake Shelton's 2008 album Starting Fires, and it's included here. I have no idea why, because it's a sort of odd joke song that Brad Paisley might have made, and while it's not a bad joke, it doesn't need to be here. We've heard this already. I guess the one saving grace is that Blake Shelton picked some better writers, because there aren't as many terrible lyrics, but it doesn't excuse the many moments where the writing just feels kind of clunky and lacking in any sort of momentum, especially when Blake Shelton tries to hop on a faster cadence that just doesn't really work for his voice. The same problem that came back on Bringing Back the Sunshine. But okay, does the production reflect any sort of experimentation or do anything different? Well, actually more than I expected. It seemed like someone was listening when I said that the pairing of Avi's drum machines with thicker strumming and twang didn't really work, because there's a fair bit more flow and organic drums to this album. Yeah, you definitely get your drum machines and process beats on Every Time I Hear That Song, or It Ain't Easy, or the opening of Green, or especially Straight Outta Cold Beer, but more often than not, this record flips into real drums and a much smoother presentation, with a lot of liquid contrasting guitar tones, pedal steel, and even some fiddles that I liked on Friends or the rest of Green. I wouldn't quite say this album tilts all the way into neo-traditional territory, although songs like Go Ahead and Break My Heart, Bet You Still Think About Me, or You Can't Make This Up, they do get kind of close in the guitar tones, but the more expansive textures, they're a pretty good fit for Blake Shelton's smoother vocals. I will say that not all the experiments really work here. I've already mentioned the horns on It Ain't Easy, which while they sound pretty good, it's obviously Blake Shelton trying to hop on the Muscle Shoals trend here, or how Every Goodbye sounds like a late period Bare Naked Ladies song and not a good one. But I think my larger issue is that for as much melody is on this album that actually brings back, there aren't really a lot of hooks that really jump out at me or don't feel entirely clumsy, or a lot of instrumental progression or evolution. It's one of the reasons why I'm more forgiving of the gospel touches on the final song, Save Your Shadow. Aside from having probably the best multi-tracking and vocal harmonies, it sounds different and unique. Because the more I went through this album, the more I asked the question, what does Blake Shelton bring here that is unique to these songs? Give them to anybody else, what happens? Well, honestly, very little. You give songs like Bet You Still Think About Me or One Night Girl to Dierks Bentley and they wouldn't feel out of place. They actually probably work better with his vocal tone, which is probably my biggest issue with this album, is that it's not bad, it's just tepid and not particularly interesting. And on some level, I get that. Blake Shelton's now 15 years into his career, with this being his 10th album after his big career resurgence, and he's struggling for fresh ideas. And yet, when given the opportunity to really delve into a highly publicized heartbreak and new love, he doesn't really get personal enough to really go deeper. Instead, surrounding the meat of a good story here with a lot of padding that didn't need to be here. And that's the disappointment, because while Blake Shelton did steer out of the skid and the whole bro country scene that was on his last couple albums, he's not really doing anything that he hasn't done in some way, shape, or form for 15 years now. And that strikes me as a real wasted opportunity. So while this album is decent and is getting a very light 6 out of 10 from me, I don't really have any need to recommend it. It's better than those last few albums, but it's nothing revolutionary. If you missed it, you wouldn't miss much. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here, so what did you guys think of this album? Did you care enough to rate it at all? Because honestly, I can't see myself remembering this in a week or so. It just did not leave much of an impression on me. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.